Most people who struggle with anxiety have already been given Philippians 4-6. Someone handed it to them in a card. A pastor quoted it from a pulpit. It showed up on a phone notification on a hard morning. Be anxious for nothing. In everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And most people who have received that verse in the middle of real anxiety have had the same quiet, unspoken response. I know, I have tried. It is not working. Not because they lack faith, not because the verse is wrong, but because the verse has almost always been handed to them as an instruction without the architecture that makes the instruction possible. Be anxious for nothing sounds like a command you obey by deciding to stop being anxious. As if the right response to a panic attack is to remind yourself that the Bible says not to panic. But that is not what Paul is doing in Philippians 4. Not even close. When you read the full passage, when you read what comes before verse 6 and what comes after it, when you look at the Greek behind the English, when you understand where Paul was sitting when he wrote these words, the verse does not sound like a command at all. It sounds like a description of something that actually works. A mechanism, not a mandate. A door, not a demand. And the difference between those two readings is the difference between a verse that produces guilt in anxious people, you should not be feeling this, and a verse that actually does what Paul says it does. The peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your heart and mind. Not might guard, not will guard if you try hard enough. Will guard. Paul uses the future tense as a guarantee, not a possibility, a result. And if that is true, if the peace described in Philippians 4 is a guaranteed result and not a reward for sufficient faith, then the question is not whether you believe it. The question is whether you have actually followed the full mechanism Paul describes. Most people have not, because nobody told them the whole thing. Before we get into the verse itself, the context is everything. Paul wrote Philippians from prison, not metaphorical prison, not a difficult season he was describing poetically. An actual Roman cell, chained to a guard, uncertain whether he would be executed or released. Philippians 1-7, 1:13, 1:17. And yet Philippians is the most joyful letter Paul ever wrote. The word joy or rejoice appears 16 times in 4 chapters. It is the dominant note of the entire letter. This is not a man writing about anxiety management from a place of comfort and safety. This is a man who had every material reason for anxiety, writing from inside the circumstances that should have produced it and describing what was happening inside him instead. Which means when Paul says be anxious for nothing, he is not speaking theoretically. He is reporting from inside the storm. This worked for me, right here, in chains. I am telling you how. And the passage builds. It does not begin at verse 6, it begins earlier. And what comes before verse 6 is the foundation that makes verse 6 possible. Philippians 4-4. Rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again. Rejoice. Philippians 4-5. Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. And then verse 6. Do not be anxious about anything. The Lord is near. That phrase, kurios egus in Greek, is not a throwaway transitional sentence. It is the theological ground on which everything that follows stands. The command to not be anxious is rooted in a fact about proximity. God is not distant, he is near. This is what most people miss when they receive Philippians 4. 6 inches isolation. The verse is not self-contained. It stands on a foundation. And the foundation is the nearness of God. The Greek word translated anxious in verse 6 is merimnao. It appears in the New Testament multiple times in the Sermon on the Mount, in the parable of the sower, in Martha's complaint to Jesus, in Paul's letters. And understanding what it actually means changes how you read the command. Merimnao comes from 2 roots. Merizo, to divide, to split, to separate into parts, and nous, the mind. Anxiety, in Paul's Greek, is a divided mind. A mind that has been split between 2 realities, the circumstances in front of you and the God behind them, and is trying to hold both simultaneously without resolution. This is important because it means Paul is not commanding you to stop feeling threatened. He is not saying your circumstances are not real, or that the danger you perceive is imaginary. He is describing what anxiety does to the mind. It divides it, and offering a mechanism that reunifies it. The anxious mind is split between what I see and what I believe, between the medical report and the God who heals, between the bank account and the God who provides, between the relationship fracturing and the God who restores. The mind is trying to hold both simultaneously, without a resolution that makes the tension bearable. And the result is merimnao, the divided, fragmented, splintered mind that cannot find rest. And Paul's solution is not, stop looking at the circumstances. It is, bring both realities into the presence of the God who holds them both. Stop trying to carry the division yourself. Bring it to the one who is large enough to hold the whole thing. This is what prayer does in Philippians 4-6. Not as a spiritual technique, as a structural solution to a structural problem. The divided mind cannot heal itself. It needs somewhere to put the division. And prayer is the act of placing the divided mind into the hands of the undivided God. Paul does not just say pray in verse 6. He gives the prayer a specific anatomy. By prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. 3 words: presouche, desis, Eucharistia, prayer, supplication, thanksgiving. Most readers run them together as synonyms. They are not. Presouche. The general word for prayer means to draw near to God. It is the posture of approach, simply coming into the presence of God, not asking for anything yet, just turning toward Him. Desis supplication means a specific, urgent, personal request. This is the prayer of need, not vague spiritual conversation. A concrete request about a specific thing that is pressing on you right now. Paul is not telling you to pray generally about your anxiety. He is telling you to name the specific thing you are anxious about, to bring the actual content of the worry into the conversation. To be specific. This matters because most anxious prayer is not actually specific. It is circular, a rehearsal of the anxiety, rather than a conversation about it. The anxious mind replays the worry rather than placing it. Desis means placing the specific thing, not just acknowledging that anxiety exists, naming the thing. And then Eucharistia, thanksgiving. This is the word that stops most people. Because thanksgiving in the middle of anxiety feels impossible at best and dishonest at worst. How do you give thanks for something you are afraid of? But Paul does not say give thanks for the thing you are anxious about. He says let your requests be made known with thanksgiving. The thanksgiving is not for the anxiety. It is the posture in which the request is made. And here is what thanksgiving does that nothing else can do. Thanksgiving requires an object. You cannot give thanks in the abstract. You have to thank someone for something specific that has already happened. Which means the act of giving thanks in the middle of anxiety forces the anxious mind to stop rehearsing the future and look back at what has already been done. This is not denial. This is deliberate redirection. The anxious mind is always leaning forward into the future, into the worst case, into the possibility. Thanksgiving pulls it backward into the past, into the evidence, into what God has already done. And when the anxious mind looks backward at what God has already done, at the prayers that were answered, the crises that resolved, the needs that were met, the darkest seasons that eventually broke the division begins to close. Not because the circumstances changed, because the God behind the circumstances came into focus. This is the mechanism. Bring the divided mind to God. Name the specific thing. Give thanks for what has already been done. And then Paul says, the peace of God will guard. Philippians 4-7. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your heart and your mind in Christ Jesus. 3 things in this verse that most readers miss. First, the peace of God, not the peace you manufacture, not the calm you achieve through breathing exercises or positive thinking or sufficient spiritual effort. The peace of God, a peace that originates outside you and arrives inside you. You do not produce it, you receive it. The grammar of the verse is passive. The peace will guard. You are not the agent. You are the recipient. Second, surpasses all understanding. The Greek is huperakousa, exceeding, surpassing, going beyond the reach of. The peace Paul describes is not something the mind can generate through understanding. It is not the peace that comes when you finally figure out the solution to the problem. It is the peace that comes before the solution. The peace that exists, independent of resolution. This is the peace that confused the disciples when Jesus slept in the storm. They were experienced fishermen. They understood the danger. Their understanding told them they were dying, and Jesus was asleep. Not because he was unaware, Because he had something their understanding could not produce, the peace of the one who made the sea. The peace Paul describes is not comprehension of the circumstances. It is not understanding why. It is not the resolution of the anxiety. It is something that arrives and stands guard before any of that happens. Third, will guard. The Greek is phoreo, a military term, to garrison, to station soldiers at a gate to prevent enemy access. The peace of God stands like armed soldiers at the gates of your heart and mind, preventing the anxiety from reoccupying what prayer has just cleared. This is not passive, this is active defense. The peace is not just a feeling of calm. It is a protecting force stationed at the entrance to your inner life, holding the ground that prayer established. And the peace guards in Christ Jesus. The protection is not floating and abstract, it is located. It is in the person of Jesus. Which means the access point to this peace is not a technique, it is a relationship. You cannot deploy the garrison without the general. Paul does not stop at verse 7. He continues. Philippians 4-8. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. This verse is usually preached as a separate lesson about positive thinking. Fill your mind with good things. It is good advice. But in context, it is something more specific and more urgent than that. Paul has just described the mechanism that guards the mind from anxiety. Now he is describing what the mind does after the garrison arrives. What do you think about once the peace has been posted at the gates? The anxious mind, left to itself, will immediately return to the worry. The prayer clears the ground. The peace guards the entrance. But the mind still needs something to do. And the default operation of an anxious mind is to go back to the rehearsal, the mental replay of the worst case. Paul's instruction is to redirect the mind deliberately and specifically to what is true. The first word in the list is not lovely or noble or admirable. It is true, whatever is true. The anxious mind specializes in untrue things. Not lies exactly, but extrapolations, projections. Possibilities that have not happened yet, worst cases that may never arrive. The anxious mind takes a real problem and extends it into a future that does not yet exist and may never exist. And then it responds emotionally to the imagined future as if it were the present reality. Paul says, bring the mind back to what is actually true, right now. Not in the projected future, not in the worst case. What is actually, presently, verifiably true. This is not spiritual bypassing. Paul is not telling you to pretend the problem does not exist. He is telling you to stop letting the mind extend the problem beyond its actual boundaries. The true thing is often smaller than the anxious mind has made it. The diagnosis is real. The uncertainty about the outcome is real. But the certainty of the worst case, the story the anxious mind has already told about how this ends, is not true. It is a projection, and the mind can be retrained to stay within the boundaries of the true. Not by willpower, by the regular, deliberate practice of bringing it back to what is actually, verifiably, presently real. Philippians 4-9. Whatever you have learned or received or heard from me, or seen in me, put it into practice. And the God of peace will be with you. This verse is the one that closes the entire passage. And it is the one that reveals why verse 6 alone, without the surrounding architecture, does not work. Paul does not say, believe Philippians 4-6 and you will have peace. He says, practice what you have seen me practice, and the God of peace will be with you. The peace is not a doctrine to affirm, it is a life to practice. And the word practice here is prasso, to do repeatedly, habitually, as a regular pattern of life. Not a one-time event, not a crisis prayer. A practiced, regular, habitual engagement with God that the crisis prayer draws on rather than initiates. This is why people who receive Philippians 4:6 inches the middle of a crisis and try to apply it for the first time in that moment find that it does not produce the result Paul describes. Not because the verse is wrong, because you cannot deploy a discipline you have never practiced in the moment you need it most. The person who finds peace in the crisis is the person who was already practicing the presence of God before the crisis arrived. Who had already been bringing their divided mind to God in the ordinary days. Who had already been developing the habit of prosursh, Jesus, Eucharistia approach, specific request, thanksgiving before the midnight cry came. The crisis does not create the capacity. The capacity was built in the ordinary days, and the crisis reveals what was already there. Paul wrote Philippians from prison, and the peace he describes was not produced by the prison, it was revealed by it. It was already there, built over decades of practiced communion with the God who was near. The Philippians 4-6 mechanism works. But it works the way all disciplines work. It requires practice before the moment of need. The garrison of peace does not appear from nowhere. It is stationed by a sustained life of prayer that has been building the relationship that makes the peace available. Stop and look at what Philippians 4-9 has actually built. It begins with the foundation. The Lord is near, not distant, not absent, not waiting for you to reach him. Near. The anxiety does not change the proximity. God is near before the prayer and after it. Then the mechanism. Bring the divided mind to God. Name the specific thing. Give thanks for what has already been done, not as spiritual performance, as structural solution. The divided mind needs somewhere to put the division. Then the result. The peace of God originating outside you, surpassing your capacity to understand it, stations itself at the gates of your heart and mind. Not maybe, will. Then the discipline. Redirect the mind to what is true, noble, right, pure, lovely, admirable. Not positive thinking, truthful thinking, staying within the actual boundaries of what is real right now. Then the practice. Not a verse to quote in a crisis. A life to build before the crisis. The regular, habitual, practiced engagement with God that accumulates into the capacity for peace under pressure. 5 layers. 1 architecture. A complete mechanism for what Paul calls the peace that surpasses understanding. And it is available to you, not because you have enough faith, not because your anxiety is small enough, because the God who is near is large enough to hold everything you bring him. So what does this look like practically? Not theoretically, not in a sermon. In your actual life, in the actual moments, when the anxiety arrives and the divided mind starts its work. Here is the mechanism as a practice. Step 1. Name what you are actually afraid of. Not a vague sense of anxiety. The specific thing. Write it down if you have to. The diagnosis. The relationship. The financial situation. The conversation you are dreading. The outcome you cannot control. Name it. Thesis requires specificity. Step 2. Bring it to God in prayer. Not to perform prayer. To place the thing. To physically, in the act of speaking or writing or kneeling, hand the specific thing to the specific person who is large enough to hold it. This is not denial, this is transfer. You are not pretending the thing is not real. You are choosing who carries it. Step 3. Give thanks before you feel better. Not for the anxiety, for 3 specific things God has already done. Not abstract blessings. Specific moments. The prayer that was answered in a way you did not expect. The crisis that resolved, the season that ended, the provision that arrived. Let the mind look backward at evidence before it is allowed to look forward into projection. Step 4. Let the peace do its work. Do not evaluate whether it is working by whether you feel immediately calm. The garrison takes its post. It guards. Sometimes you feel the warmth of peace immediately. Sometimes you feel it hours later. Sometimes you feel it only in retrospect when you realize the anxiety did not destroy you the way you were certain it would. The peace was working even when you could not feel it working. Step 5. Practice this before you need it. Not just in crisis. In the ordinary days. The morning prayer before the hard day begins. The thanksgiving before the difficult conversation. The specific naming of fear before it has time to become a rehearsal. Build the practice in the small anxieties so the mechanism is available for the large ones. This is what Paul was describing from his Roman prison. Not a verse to quote at yourself when the anxiety comes. A practiced relationship with the God who is near that produces the peace the verse describes. There is a detail at the end of Philippians 4 that most people never reach because they stop at verse 7. Verses 11 and 12. I have learned, in whatever state I am, to be content. I know how to be abased, and I know how to abound. Everywhere and in all things I have learned both to be full and to be hungry, both to abound and to suffer need. I have learned, not I was given, not I decided, not I believed hard enough. I have learned. The Greek is manthano, to learn through experience, through practice, through the accumulation of repeated engagement with a subject until it becomes second nature. Paul is saying, this peace, I am describing this contentment in chains, this rejoicing in prison, this anxiety for nothing while waiting to find out whether Caesar will execute me, this is not a spiritual gift I received at conversion and have carried effortlessly since. This is something I learned through being abased, through being hungry, through suffering need, through the accumulated practice of bringing a divided mind to an undivided God again and again and again, until the practice became the person. And what he learned, anyone can learn. Because the learning is not about circumstances. It is not about having the right situation, the right personality, the right amount of faith. It is about the practice. The repeated, ordinary, unspectacular practice of a divided mind finding its way to an undivided God. Philippians 4:13 comes right after this. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. We quote that verse at athletic events and graduation ceremonies. We put it on posters above weight rooms. But in context, the all things Paul is referring to is being content in chains, being at peace while waiting to be executed. Having the anxiety for nothing when everything visible says anxiety is the rational response. That is the all things, not the superhuman achievements. The ordinary daily practice choosing of God over the divided mind. And the strength is not willpower. It is not positive thinking. It is the strength of the one who is near, who was near to Paul in the Roman prison, who is near to you right now, in whatever room you are in whatever season you are carrying. The verse that actually stops anxiety is not a technique to deploy. It is a relationship to practice. And the relationship is already available. The God is already near. The mechanism is already described. The peace is already promised. All that remains is to begin. If this helped you see Philippians 4 differently, if it moved the verse from a command you cannot obey to a mechanism, you can actually practice share it with someone right now who is in the middle of something that is dividing their mind, not because they need better theology, because they need to know the peace is guaranteed. Not conditional, not based on their performance, guaranteed by a God who is near and a mechanism that actually works. Subscribe so you do not miss what comes next. Leave a comment. Tell me what layer of this passage you had never seen before. It helps more people find this than you know. And if you are anxious right now, if the divided mind is already working, try the mechanism before this video ends. Name the thing. Bring it to God. Give thanks for 3 specific things he has already done. And let the peace do what Paul promised it would. Will guard. Not might. Will. God bless you.